Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are going to be talking about what may be an unexpected Zelda announcement in the upcoming Nintendo Direct that many of us believe will be happening in the month of February, due to rumors, history, and just their need of there being a Direct where there are more announcements about the Switch 2 and such. But it's also Zelda's 40th anniversary, and there's a lot of different ideas about what may happen for Zelda's 40th anniversary. And I don't necessarily think there's going to be a dedicated Zelda 40th Anniversary Direct, or that they're going to have all the announcements in the beginning of the year. But I think there is growing reason to think that something may get announced soon that has to do with The Legend of Zelda, but it's not what you think. It's something unexpected, but when I say unexpected, I don't mean like something small and not that exciting. I mean something very exciting, but unexpected, something that perhaps would go against what you would expect for Nintendo to announce. But when you really think about it, this should have happened a long time ago, and we're well overdue for this type of announcement, and there is reason to believe that something like this may be happening really soon, presumably in the next Nintendo Direct. And so that's what I want to dive into today. Now you might be wondering, what am I getting at here? Well, consider this for a moment. Let's take a look at the Super Mario series. The Super Mario series is incredible. You have 3D Mario with the Super Mario games, and then you have the Mario Bros games that are the 2D Mario games. But then you have so many different spin-off titles. You have all the Mario Sports titles, you have the Mario Party games, you have Mario Kart, you have the Mario RPG games, you have Paper Mario. But then you also have other series that are based off the Mario universe to some extent, but are also entirely their own thing, and don't have that spin-off energy, like Luigi's Mansion, Donkey Kong. Arguably the best game from Nintendo last year was Donkey Kong Bonanza, and we're eagerly anticipating the announcement for Luigi's Mansion 4. It would be a huge game. If Luigi's Mansion 4 is announced, people are going to be looking at this like some sort of minor spin-off. This would be a substantial release that stands on its own. And outside of Pokemon, because that's not entirely handled by internal Nintendo, their most important IP are Mario and Zelda. And so when you start to think about Zelda, it doesn't have the exact same level of support with the different branching offs of different types of games, but you might think they would want to go in that direction. We are getting the live-action Zelda movie as the next big movie series from Nintendo. That's coming out in the first half of next year. And there are some signs suggesting that Nintendo is going to be pushing Zelda's 40th anniversary somewhat similar to Mario's. There is a decent amount of history where we've seen Nintendo push Mario's anniversaries far more than Zelda's, but outside of Mario, Nintendo does push Zelda's anniversaries quite a bit. And this time around, it is looking like things are going to be bigger, because we do have the live-action movie next year. The next expansion to Super Nintendo World is expected to be based off The Legend of Zelda, and Nintendo's already announcing some things like the recently confirmed Ocarina of Time Lego set. It does seem that they are gearing for something bigger this time around. But the Zelda series has its 3D Zelda games, and it has its 2D Zelda games, like 3D Mario, but there isn't a Mario Kart for the Zelda series, there isn't a Luigi's Mansion or a Donkey Kong for the series. But maybe there should be, and maybe it's something that should have happened a long time ago. Consider this for a moment. A few years ago, we heard about this cancelled project at Retro Studios that only got so far as pre-production. They were working on a Zelda game that would be outside of the typical Zelda game, so technically a spin-off. It was going to be based off the Sheikah, and it was going to tie into the Zelda timeline. There were ideas about it taking place in the Fallen Hero timeline and explaining the origins of the Master Sword, and the main character would have been the last remaining male Sheikah. Like, these are some of the concepts and ideas they were considering. It was going to have a very dark, edgy look, and a lot of the concept art here is really, really cool. But it didn't make it past pre-production, as a lot of games don't. But the very fact that an idea like this was in the works at Retro Studios, a Nintendo developer, it goes to show that there's always been this potentiality that there could be some type of new IP that's based off the Zelda series, but also becomes this new thing that's not treated with this spin-off energy like a Mario Sports title or like a Hyrule Warriors game, but something that's perhaps treated with a little bit more acclaim and respect, such as Donkey Kong Bonanza or Luigi's Mansion 3 for the Mario series. We haven't gotten anything like that, but what if finally we are about to get something like that? So many of you, if you've been following me or you pay attention to a lot of Monolith Soft and Xenoblade channels, you may have heard discussion about Project Legacy. Project Legacy is technically a rumor, but one that's almost certainly an accurate leak because it comes from the same source, Midori, who's leaked out a variety of codename projects for Nintendo that have come out over the last year or two. Several have already been confirmed, and we're just left with a couple that have yet to have been totally confirmed, but given that all the others have been confirmed, like Edward for Echoes of Wisdom or Banquet for Super Mario Party Jamboree, this Project Legacy title is said to have been a title to have been in development over the last few years from Monolith Soft. And what's interesting about this is that going beyond this likely leaked information, we have concrete details about a project that Monolith Soft has been working on throughout the entire Switch era. They had recruitment pages for a fantasy medieval action game that is supposed to be something outside of their typical brand image. There's actually a pretty decent track history of continued hires for a project like this. We even have LinkedIn profile listings for designers at Monolith Soft about this action game that was supposedly in development for Nintendo Switch for years, which sounds very similar to the situation regarding Donkey Kong Bonanza and Mario Kart World. Both titles were in development for Switch for years, but at some point they transitioned over to making them Switch 2 titles. Hence why they had such long development cycles, and that would explain why we haven't seen this one yet. And so given that there's many years of us seeing evidence for them hiring for this project, and the precedent we have seen with other internal Nintendo projects such as Donkey Kong and Mario Kart, there's plenty of reason to think that they simply have been working on this one for a very long time, and it could actually be coming out relatively soon, early on into the Switch 2 era, which also lines up with the trend we've seen with all these different leaked codename projects. Most of them have come out already, either to close the Switch 1 era or to open up the Switch 2 era. This would be one of the last remaining ones. It does lead me to think that this would be coming out relatively soon, and we have more rumors to support this because from Nash Weedle, who has gotten many things right all throughout the year of 2025 and then some, a lot of other insiders have actually corroborated a lot of his info and backed him up. In other words, he seems pretty credible. He has said he has heard that Monolith Soft may be gearing up for an announcement in the next Nintendo Direct. So we may finally hear about what this game actually is in the next Nintendo Direct, and it could be a very exciting game. Monolith Soft makes incredible games. You may not have played these games before because they're relatively niche, but I recommend you do. They are some of the best RPGs out there with vast, beautiful worlds to explore and incredible stories and some really unique combat. But the point is, Monolith Soft makes incredible games. They also do support work for a Splatoon series, the Animal Crossing series, and the mainline 3D Zelda games as well. Monolith Soft does a lot of work, and they are constantly contributing to some very, very high quality games. So if they have been working on this new IP project throughout the entire Switch era, and it's about to be announced to be one of the big releases for 2026 to really help to push the beginning of the Switch 2 era, I have plenty of reason to be extremely excited about this, even if it has nothing to do with the Zelda series. Now, if you've gone this far into the video and you haven't subscribed already, and you do find yourself enjoying my videos, I would appreciate that subscription. So while I am super hyped for this project, regardless of whether it's Zelda or not, there is reason to think that it is related to Zelda. And I did make a video a few weeks ago talking about the possibility of maybe Monolith Soft being involved with the next Zelda game, which seems pretty obvious. They worked on Skyward Sword, they worked on Breath of the Wild, they worked on Tears of the Kingdom, but I'm not necessarily talking about the next open-air Zelda, even though they're probably working on that one too. We've talked about the theorized and rumored Ocarina of Time remake, which I think there's a lot of evidence for. We've covered it in various videos. But there's been some uncertainty as to who would be working on this project. Perhaps Monolith Soft would be heavily involved. I think this project is happening, and I do think they likely are involved, as they are with every mainline 3D Zelda. And I consider the possibility that maybe this action game, set in a fantasy medieval world, could actually be this remake project. Now, I theorized it, but to be clear, and I hope I made it clear in that video, I don't actually think this is what is happening. It was simply a consideration. And when you take a look at the art that Monolith Soft had put out for the recruitment for this action game set in a fantasy medieval setting, the art you see is very reminiscent of the Zelda series. This one right here, you see a warrior princess. She's wearing a crown, so she's obviously royalty, but she has a long flowing blonde hair, blue eyes, is clad in blue. That's very much a Zelda-like design. So it's almost like a warrior princess Zelda, which we've seen depictions of throughout the Zelda series. And then the other one that we've seen is also set in this fantasy medieval setting, but it has what appears to be a realistic looking version of the goddess statue from Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom. That statue is in some sort of temple or ruined structure that's ancient, that has the wings that appears to be celebrating goddess Hylia. But not only that, there are some insignias upon the walls that look very much like the Hyrule symbol. And so while this may just be art for the recruitment page, I don't think we should just cast it off as nothing. I made this point in a video a few weeks ago, but we look at the banner art that Retro Studios had shared when they were hiring for Metroid Prime 4 years back, and the shadow is in the shape of Sylux before Sylux was confirmed to be in the game. This art was teasing the heavy involvement of Sylux in Metroid Prime 4, which obviously now we know to be the case. So I don't think we should just write off this art as nothing, and the fact that there are some pretty heavy Zelda signs in this art, I think actually speaks more to the idea I'm getting at here. Monolith Soft has been developing a new IP. They have been developing an action game set in a fantasy medieval setting, but it's also still Zelda related. You can make a new IP, but it still also be a spin-off at the same time. You look at Luigi's Mansion, you look at Donkey Kong, these are based off the Mario universe, but they're also their own thing. They also are their own IP that can go on to be successful, have their own movies, merchandising lines, stories, and just continued iterative games. Monolith Soft may be working on something like this, and there's even more reason to believe that. Two different interviews came out in December that have to do with the future of The Legend of Zelda, which I find to be a very interesting coincidence given that we are entering 2026, Zelda's 40th anniversary. And one of those, at the very end, Iwamoto says, "I would like Monolith Soft to play a central role as a strong partner in creating the Zelda series from scratch. I hope that the know-how we have cultivated through our work together will further enhance the overall team strength of Monolith Soft, and we will continue to create unique series titles together." There is a strong emphasis on Monolith Soft taking on a larger role with the Zelda series. Some people took this to mean that Monolith Soft could be making their own Zelda game. And maybe they actually are. Because we had another interview, and we've talked about these interviews multiple times, but as we continue to look at it, consider different angles, there's more things that I sort of notice and connect that are interesting. But we had this other interview where they were talking about the process of developing Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, and at the end of the interview, Zelda series producer Eiji Aonuma said this: "Age of Imprisonment is the first Zelda title for Switch 2. To be honest, I wanted to be the first to do so," laughs. "However, the inspiration we received from this collaboration with Koei Tecmo may be reflected in the Zelda we create. Please imagine this while playing Age of Imprisonment and look forward to our Zelda." So there are two big points here, and I've really only focused on one and just glossed over the other one. The first big point is that Aonuma is teasing the next Zelda game. He's talking about how Age of Imprisonment is the first Zelda game, how Koei Tecmo got out the first Zelda on Switch 2, but Aonuma, the Zelda series producer, Nintendo, is talking about how he wanted a Zelda game out first, and is telling us to look forward to our Zelda, our next Zelda game. And given that this interview came out at the very end of 2025, going into 2026, Zelda's 40th anniversary, it does lead one to believe that perhaps he's teasing a Zelda game to come out in 2026 for the 40th anniversary, which, by the way, if you are unaware, Aonuma has a long history of teasing future Zelda projects. He's done it so many times, he's even confirmed it himself, so there's really no doubt that he may do it again, because he's consistently done it. And this time, he's very obviously teasing some kind of future Zelda. And when you also think about that we got Echoes of Wisdom in 2024 and Tears of the Kingdom in 2023, a brand new 2D Zelda and a brand new 3D Zelda both seem really unlikely, but he's teasing our Zelda from Nintendo as if it's something that could come out really soon. So what could that possibly be? Well, we've been talking about the Ocarina of Time remake. I do think that is a great way to get out a traditional style Zelda game to tide us over until the next open-air Zelda is ready. But we've heard from rumors, specifically from Nash Weedle, that from what he understands, he's not expecting it until 2027 at the earliest, which does make some sense. Well, obviously would also make sense for the 40th anniversary, but if it's not ready, having it come out in the holidays of 2027 to follow up the hype of the Zelda movie would be very similar to how Nintendo handled the release of Mario Wonder, announcing it shortly after the release of the prior Mario movie that came out in 2023, and that popularity of the movie partially contributed to the success of Mario Wonder and vice versa with the cross-promotion. Nintendo may be planning something similar for Zelda in 2027. And so if that is the case, what could Nintendo possibly put out that would be worth teasing by Aonuma, that would be worthwhile, and something that could be a big release in 2026? I think a very simple remaster collection or anything like that wouldn't really cut it here. This wouldn't be worth teasing. If they re-release Twilight Princess HD with no changes or subtle changes, I just don't think that would be it. But when we consider the other element to what Aonuma says here, it really starts to get me thinking. The inspiration we received from this collaboration with Koei Tecmo may be reflected in the Zelda we create. Please imagine this while playing Age of Imprisonment and look forward to our Zelda. So what is it about Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment that they are taking inspiration from for the next Zelda game? And Aonuma doesn't say that much during this interview, but he is most active when they are talking about combat in the game. Now, he's remarking upon the different modes of combat in Age of Imprisonment, how you can fly around in the sky, and how in Age of Calamity you can control the divine beasts, but maybe this helps us to figure a little bit more about what Aonuma may be getting at when considering how Age of Imprisonment could be inspiration for the next Zelda. Age of Imprisontment's core draw is that it's a very combat-heavy game. That is his big thing. You might say that the cinematics or the story could help draw you in, but personally, I'm not saying it's bad, but I don't think it's really any better than what we've seen in Tears of the Kingdom, and I would argue that the story beats in Tears of the Kingdom are way better. So upon thinking upon it more closely, if we're to take any substantial meaning from these comments here, I feel like it would have to do with the gameplay, the combat. That's something I think that could benefit the Zelda series. And so, let's go back to that Monolith Soft project. We know the Zelda team wants them to be more involved with the development of Zelda. We know that there have been different Nintendo teams like Retro Studios who have considered making more significant spin-offs in the Zelda series before, they just never made it past pre-production. And Monolith Soft is developing a action game set in the fantasy medieval setting that had art that was very Zelda-like, and here we have Aonuma teasing that the next Zelda game could be coming out soon. It probably isn't going to be 3D Zelda or 2D Zelda, not the traditional kind. So I'm left to think, well, what if Monolith Soft is just making a new IP set in the Zelda universe that would be a fantasy medieval setting that is action-oriented? And also, by the way, according to some of the job descriptions for what they were hiring for, may also include online elements as well. This may be more of a fantasy medieval Zelda game that has online multiplayer elements as opposed to a single-player experience. But it has a heavy action focus. I mean, we look at the Warrior Zelda image there, that's depicting a war. Or even the other image, that's depicting a soldier who's been through some great challenges. So this may be a Zelda game that's more focused on the world of Hyrule, with an action focused and also considering Monolith Soft's pedigree, probably vast, beautiful worlds to explore, incredible music, and very strong story, pretty much the best story we see from any Nintendo series. This could be what they're working on, and if that's the case, this could be the best game this year if we're not getting a traditional Zelda game this year, and if we're not getting a 3D Mario this year. And even if we do, it might still be better than those, and it could be its own thing. But whatever this ends up being called, we're not going to look at it as, oh, the next 3D Zelda. We're going to look at it for what it is, the same way we look at Luigi's Mansion as the next Luigi's Mansion game, not a Mario game, or for Donkey Kong, same thing. And by the way, for those who might mention that this could be maybe Xenoblade Chronicles 4, we've already heard that after Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed, that they've already reached a certain point in the series, and while they may come back to Xenoblade, it's not going to be following the same elements, and they're hiring for a new RPG project now. They're building up for that project now. That's likely years away. And as we talked about, the way this project is described, it's different from Monolith Soft's brand image, so another Xenoblade game probably wouldn't fit that. Not to mention, the codename leak of Legacy does not match any of the other codenames we've seen from prior Xenoblade games. It's very different. It's not matching Space Folk or Little Folk or Titans or anything like that. Legacy, it's its own thing, which also, by the way, would fit this idea of Zelda, history, wars in a fantasy medieval time, Legacy. It makes a lot of sense. But what do you all think? Am I onto something here? Could Monolith Soft be working on something that is Zelda, but also its own thing at the same time? And could it be absolutely huge? Let me know what you think in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.